Hello there and welcome to The Brief. It's Wednesday, 30th of March. I'm Jessy Chahal. Joining me as usual on his crisis update segment is Nordin, Abdullah, crisis management analyst, to walk us through the post-COVID-19 strategy, innovative digital technologies, and ASEAN being on the right track, as well as we'll take a look at Bank Negara Malaysia's annual report 2021. And a little later, science journalist DEBORA MACKENZIE sends us her take on Malaysia's road to Endemicity from a global perspective. All that happening on this edition of The Brief. Thanks for joining me. As usual, first things first, let's dive into news in brief. Here's a look at what's going on locally. Now, Minister in the Prime Minister's Department of Parliament and Law has presented 3 criteria defining party hopping in the draft of the Constitution Amendment Bill. Following are the criteria. First, an MP announces leaving the party he/she contested in for an election to be independent member or to join another political party. Second, when an MP is expelled from the political party. And lastly, independent MPs who announce joining any political party after their victory. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Finance is confident in the success of Malaysia's journey together towards sustainability paved by sustainable development financing. According to the Finance Minister, financial institutions must work together to ensure funds for sustainable development are available. In the meantime, the Prime Minister's diplomatic visit to Qatar has been fruitful for the nation, with flourishing bilateral trade and collaboration in various sectors, from the halal industry to renewable energy. There has also been significant increased trade value in Qatar's investment in the country, exceeding 13.49 billion ringgit to date. And adding on to that, Malaysia and Qatar have decided to mutually recognize vaccination certificates and integrate Malaysia's MySejahtera and Qatar's Ehteraz applications. This is part of both the countries' efforts towards recovery post-pandemic. And the Communications and Multimedia Minister urges Malaysians to continue to practice new norms of the past 2 years, and that the transition should not mean an end of those practices. Of course, we move into an endemic phase from the pandemic in just a couple of days come 1st of April. He advocates for practices like working from home and online purchases as a way of life, despite the life returning to normal. Well, at this point, it's time to bring in Nordin, Abdullah, crisis management analyst, for the crisis update. Nordin, let's firstly look at what the Deputy Communications and Multimedia Minister has said just yesterday, talking about innovative digital technologies. This is a post-COVID-19 recovery strategy, and he says it must include these technologies and also business models for the country to become more resilient as the country transits into the endemic phase. Nordin.
Well, Jessy, yesterday at the Malaysia Global Business Forum, the Deputy Minister, Datuk Zahidi, was very clear in his strategic approach and how the government will address resilience. And I think this is one thing coming out of COVID-19 that the government has realized. They need to look at resilience from an all-of-nation approach. But one of the key components of an all-of-nation approach is the corporate sector. And we're seeing how the ministry, especially KCOM, is going to look at digital resilience within the context of the corporate sector to ensure that they're able to handle crises in the future. One of those key areas is to ensure that they're cyber resilient, so that cyber threats are not going to be the things that destroys the livelihoods of these companies, whether it's through reputational damage, revenue damage, or indeed other impacts on their share prices. So this is something that we're looking at in terms of how the GLCs will perform, how SMEs will plug into that equation, all the way down to the micro level, and looking at how that will then cascade into higher learning and school institutions, so that the literacy, the digital literacy, is there as a baseline for moving forward within the new global digital economy that we're now faced with.
Okay, so we're looking at sort of a wait and see sort of style at this point of time because, as all the plans have been made as we move towards an endemic phase, also now we'll just have to see how things really pan out and how resilient and how sustainable some of these businesses and industries will be in terms of doing all business in the new norm.
Well, Jessy, I think one of the things, the other part of this resiliency is the approach to ensuring that the digital infrastructure is there. And one of those key comments was looking at how 5G will be rolled out and the phases that it will go in and how that will impact businesses in the urban settings and then later on in rural settings. Then also looking at how Malaysian consumer behavior has changed. Especially around use of apps. And of course, MySejahtera has been one of those apps that now have become commonplace. But now this is changed consumer behavior. So now we're looking at how will other companies plug into this and how will that become more efficient? And then Malaysian companies will become more productive. When people are more productive, they become more profitable. When companies are more profitable, they can start to get to that sweet spot where they can start to pay their staff more. So issues around low wages and all this is not an issue when you're doing well as a corporation, and that's why digital resilience in the corporate sector has become a key component of moving forward.
Right, it does seem that for now things seem to be on the right track in terms of recovery and for companies holding on to that resilience. Speaking of the right track, Defence Minister Datuk Seri Syamuddin Hussein has said that despite vaccine shortages, logistics issues and some people's reluctance to be vaccinated, ASEAN as a whole is on the right track in handling the COVID-19 pandemic. He's also noted that so far almost 90% of the high-risk population in the region has been vaccinated with at least one dose, while most in member countries, that being more than 65% of the populations, have achieved some level of immunity. So good news all around. 2 years so far, we have already had all these stats as proof as well. But at this point, what is your view on ASEAN members coming together, working together in battling this unseen enemy further?
Well, Jessy, one of the things that I like about ASEAN is they quietly go about doing their business and then all of a sudden things are done. And I think one of the things when we look at the ASEAN framework and how the COVID-19 response has rolled out over the last few years, now we're seeing the benefits of the good relationship between the different ASEAN countries and ASEAN partners. And Malaysia has rightfully taken a strong leading role within the context of ASEAN. And we've seen the Prime Minister, especially recently, a lot of his international trips have been to ASEAN countries to ensure that travel is available to ASEAN business community as well as the ASEAN tourism sector, so that normalization of movement of people within ASEAN has been a priority for Malaysia and other ASEAN partners. That will be the forerunner of the economic recovery because of tourism and travel. This is what some of the direct cash inflows that those ASEAN economies, including Malaysia, have been missing for the last few years. So we're looking at a crisis response that is in line with the ASEAN agenda and also directly in line with Malaysia's objectives as we go towards the endemic phase of dealing with COVID-19.
Right. And speak of the endemic, of course, that brings about what's happening on the 1st of April in terms of our borders opening as well. The Asian Development Bank, or ADB, in its latest report has said that the Omicron variant still threatens the ASEAN economy in terms of its recovery as well. What can these nations do at this point to keep away from any crisis that could explode in the next few months, as one may suggest that it could be fragile months as we get back on our feet? Nordin.
Sorry, Jess, I'm not getting all of that question, but if I can, what I'm seeing now in Malaysia and what we're seeing across the region is, of course, a cautious approach. Of course, in Europe and other parts of the world, changes have taken place. where people quickly move to the endemic phase, and it's more about a question of civil liberties and not wearing masks and not doing this and not doing that. Where in ASEAN, especially in the countries that Malaysia has very strong relationships with, we're seeing a more responsible and community-driven approach. And whenever we look at crisis management, we look at the ability for communities to be resilient and communities to respond to a crisis. So the question of civil liberties, while of course, is always important, but it's not a question of whether wearing a mask or not is a civil liberty. And I think some of these very simple things that are happening in ASEAN will actually, in the long run, even though maybe for 1 or 2 more years we might see mask wearing and other things go on, I think in that equation will work out for the best. At the same time, Malaysia as a nation, as with its healthcare system, will not be overburdened by even several 100,000 visitors in the next months, simply because we've got the hospital beds now, we've got the ventilators, we've got enough capacity to deal with the issues. So we're not going to go into a crisis.
Right, Nordin, let's move on. Let's look at Bank Negara Malaysia's annual report 2021. But just before that, here's a quick update that we've just received. BNM says they have no immediate plan to issue a central bank digital currency or CBDC, either in the form of wholesale or retail. So they have no immediate plan at this point, safe to say, perhaps no intention yet as well. The governor says currently Malaysia's domestic payment system has remained efficient to support the needs of economy and allow real-time digital payments as well. But that aside, let's look at the GDP. According to Bank Negara Malaysia, our GDP is expected to improve further by an expansion of between 5.3 to 6.3% this year. That's up 3.1% growth from 2021. Nordin.
Exactly, Jessy. And we always say bankers are conservative and central bankers are the most conservative of the lot. So when we see these kind of very positive figures come out of the central bank, business people are rightfully excited. And I think one of the things that I always talk about in terms of the COVID-19 response and what it means for the Malaysian economy, it's always for me, the moment tourism starts, the moment we're able to see significant movement of people across borders, we will see that direct cash come into the economy. And that is what, for me, will start to drive those numbers that Bank Negara is talking about, simply because confidence will return, investors will return. And this makes life easier for everyone who's looking to grow their business at this stage. So I think with that kind of positive numbers coming out of Bank Negara, I think we are looking at a very positive rebound from the last 2 years of constant crisis, whether it is COVID-19 or even other issues that have hit the country. Now we're going to see the economy move.
Speaking of other issues, unemployment rate. Now, BNM is also saying as economic activities picks up, the unemployment rate is expected to decline further this year to about 4% of the labor force, supported by targeted measures to boost labor demand, facilitate reskilling and upskilling, and also reduce labor market friction. So where do we go from here in terms of re-employment, new hires, and increasing the employment rate as a whole?
Well, Jessy, everything is a lot easier to deal with when you have the resources to deal with it. And economic growth leads to one, direct cash into the economy. The other, it gives the financial institutions the confidence to be able to lend more money. And more importantly, the business people have the confidence to borrow it, because they know they're coming out of the other side of a crisis. And often, when we look at economic numbers, post-crisis, you see that people have a lot of pent-up demand and a lot of pent-up ability to spend. But with confidence comes growth. And I think this is what we're seeing from a crisis management perspective, those companies who were able to survive this 2 years will now be able to grow. At the same time, there'll be a bunch of new companies who rightly have innovated and as the economy has changed. Digital economy has now become way more important. It's almost doubled. And I think when we looked at our discussions yesterday during the Malaysia Global Business Forum, it will make up 25% of Malaysia's GDP production. So it also means that the government will have a different tax base to also pull on. So we're going to be able to see a lot more positive developments come out of Malaysia simply because of what's going to happen on 1st of April.
That's right. Just as you say that, we've just received another update. The governor of BNM, Tan Sri Nur Samsia Mohamad Yunus, has said that Malaysia should urgently reform its social protection system to ensure people will not face any serious financial hardship in the near future. The governor has made a call after the recent EPF data showing that about 6.1 million EPF members have less than 10,000 retirement savings in their accounts, and among that 3.6 million have less than 1,000. Lots to think about as we move ahead as well, but nonetheless happy that we're at this point where things can resume to somewhat normal. Nordin, we'll check in with you again. Till then, do take care. That was Nordin Abdullah, Crisis Management Analyst, weighing in on a couple of important issues here in the country. Well, let's take a quick look at business in brief right now. The ringgit opened higher against the US dollar today as the greenback retreated amidst the risk on mode in the US equity market. As of 9 a.m. this morning, the local currency strengthened $1 standing at 4 ringgit and 20 cents. And Bursa remained higher at midday on continued buying in key heavyweights led by Maybank and Public Bank. At lunch break, the FBM KLCI increased 3.41 points to 1586.83. And on gold prices, the physical price of gold as of 9:30 a.m. today stood at 251 ringgit 45 cents per gram. Meanwhile, Bank Negara Malaysia says the domestic monetary and financial conditions are expected to remain positive and supportive of financial intermediation and further catalyze economic recovery amid reconciling monetary policy. The financing activity is said to remain supported by a sound banking system and well-functioning capital markets. And Britain's economic growth is expected to slow down amid the biggest single shock from energy price hikes since the 1970s. Bank of England governor reports slowing signs of business and consumer demands, given the roof-high cost of living and soaring prices of gas, electricity, and other goods and services. Well, in our feature today, is of course, Malaysia opens up for business this April 1st, transitioning into the endemic phase. While it's time for life to continue, life as we knew it, we must also listen to those who are watching the movement of this pandemic and work out the kinks moving forward. We checked in with DEBORA MACKENZIE, a science journalist specializing in infectious disease. She's also the author of Stopping the Next Pandemic, How COVID-19 Can Help Us Save Humanity. Here are some of the questions we asked her, and she provided her take on Malaysia moving forward in respect to global perspective around the world as we move into the endemic phase. Of course, with the time difference, we could not get her live, but we did ask her firstly these questions. We asked her about her view on Malaysia's strategy moving forward and in taking lessons from countries that have fully transitioned to the endemic phase. What can and should Malaysia expect? Also, what should be on our checklist prior to opening up the country, and possible red flags to look out for. This is what she said.
You've asked, what is my view on Malaysia's strategy for moving into endemicity? I assume that by endemic, you mean a point where we relax all the restrictions like social distancing or masks or closing businesses that we've applied to slow the spread of COVID. If that's the case, then I think Malaysia is being much wiser than some countries in allowing a transition period to start on the 1st of April. You're starting out by making very cautious changes, like allowing businesses to stay open longer, reducing social distancing in some places, But you're keeping your masks on. You're still using your mobile tracking apps in crowded places. You're requiring tests for people entering Malaysia. In contrast, the UK, for example, is dropping or has dropped virtually all such restrictions. As a result, cases of COVID, hospitalizations, and deaths are rising. And the health services are starting to come under strain. Just because you're starting to ease up a bit doesn't mean that COVID isn't still out there killing people. And to move cautiously, I think, is a very wise approach.
Well, moving forward, we asked her if Malaysia is in the early stages of developing our own COVID-19 vaccine. What would her take be on this?
The more countries there are in the world that can not only manufacture vaccines but can also develop them, the better prepared we will be for the next pandemic. And the less likely it will be that we will have a situation like now, where 72% of the people in rich countries are vaccinated, but only 15% in poor ones. And in some countries in Asia, it's much less than that. This is shameful. Of course, we have to be careful. If lots of countries are making vaccines, you can imagine some of them saying, we'll only use the vaccine we developed. And maybe they're just saying that to boost their own companies. That's not the best result we can hope for. What we need is a global arrangement where the best vaccines are distributed everywhere, fast, when we need them, no matter who developed them. So it will be good if as many countries as possible can manufacture vaccines. And the patent rules allow them to make vaccines developed anywhere. But it's also good to see countries like Malaysia investing in vaccine research and development. As long as the results get to the people who need them, I say the more the better.
And finally, we asked DEBORA on her comment on the world's preparedness for the next possible outbreak and what lessons can we glean from COVID to build a new global strategy.
Question. COVID demonstrated that the world is massively unprepared for pandemics, and I don't yet see real signs of that changing meaningfully, although a lot of people are certainly discussing it. And please don't listen to people calling COVID a once-in-a-generation pandemic. I've heard that a couple of times recently, and there is absolutely no reason why it should be. There could be an outbreak of a new disease happening right now that could cause a pandemic. What we need, above all, is excellent surveillance of infections in humans and animals in all countries. This is especially true for the poorest ones. Many are located in the tropics. They have many wild animal species that can pass new germs to us, and of course they are now least likely to be able to diagnose and control a new disease. So we really have to build the capacity of every country to keep an eye on the infections that are happening in its own backyard, and then we'll all be safer. And having done that, we need ironclad systems for sharing that information rapidly and openly and globally. That was what allowed COVID to get out of hand in the first place. China didn't sound the alarm soon enough, even though it had world-class surveillance systems, and it should have done that. And China is far from being the only country like that. It's easy to point fingers, but there have been counties in the United States that have refused to share their local data on numbers of infections. If we don't learn anything else from COVID, it is that we are now one planet when it comes to disease, and we have to start acting like it. That means we look everywhere for germs that are spreading, and we tell everyone about it. And then we collaborate on keeping it under control and making the vaccines. But first, we need to be on our guard. A new pandemic could start any time.
That was DEBORA MACKENZIE, science journalist, weighing in a little bit on us moving forward. Well, let's take a quick look at the international news in brief. According to Johns Hopkins University, the total number of COVID-19 cases in the US have toppled, exceeding 80 million. The country is among the worst hit, accounting for nearly 16% of the total global COVID-19 deaths. And US Centers for Disease and Control and Prevention cites the new Omicron variant as the dominant cause of strain in the country, given its increased transmissibility. And now on to updates on Russia and Ukraine. The two countries have concluded a fresh round of in-person peace talks in Istanbul yesterday. Ukrainian delegates expressed hopes to see several countries as guarantors in protection for Ukraine, whereas Russian negotiators pledged to scale down their military activities but emphasized that the presidents of the two countries may meet only when the peace treaty draft is approved. And in the meantime, the UNDP calls for the international community to stand in support for Afghanistan as the nation is crippling with economic and humanitarian crisis following Western sanctions. The US has abruptly cancelled meetings with the Taliban in Doha meant to address key economic issues after the rulers reversed decision to allow girls to return to school. And every day we bring you updates on what's trending on social media, especially on Twitter. Well, today it is a buzz. The hashtag Prof and hashtag UITM is trending after a viral video of a lecturer from the university bluntly humiliates a student for not being able to afford a computer. She is caught making remarks targeting the B40 community, saying things like, "That's why I can't be with B40 people. They prioritize other things rather than education." Here's a quick watch at the video for you.
Komputer?
Saya tak ada komputer, Prof.
Semester 5 kau tak ada komputer. Aku sanggup, aku tak ada pakaian. Aku ada 5 lai je pakaian. The most important, the computer is very, very important for me. Hanya 800 saja beli komputer. Apa masalah kau? Pasal itu aku tak boleh duduk orang dengan B40. Ya? Dia lebih memikirkan pasal lain daripada pelajaran.
As we know, the university management has been informed and they will act accordingly. Well, that's all the time we have on this edition of The Brief. Thanks for tuning in. Catch me tomorrow, same time, same place for more real-life and in-depth discussions and a quick look at what's happening in and around the country. Till then, take care.